Welcome to Well Informed, where we dive deep into the stories and strategies behind creating safer communities and schools. Today, we have the privilege of hosting Frank Grosspietsch, a renowned expert in the field of firearms, ammunition, and their illicit use in trafficking. Frank brings a wealth of knowledge from his 14 years with the RCMP's National Weapons Enforcement Support Team, or NWEST, and continues to impact the field as a subject matter consultant and technical advisor for prestigious organizations such as the United Nations Regional Center for Peace and the OSCE. His work in gun photometry, a crucial process for identifying firearms from images, plays a pivotal role in the fight against illegal weapons trafficking. Join us as we explore the intricacies of this field, learn more about the tools and techniques used to keep our community safe, and delve into Frank's vast experience with a focus on a case that highlights the best practices in firearm identification. So obviously for our conference, that's realistically what your talk tomorrow is going to be about, specific cases and usage. But I think, imagine we're having a conversation with somebody who has no idea about the role that you've played and the work that you do specifically. That's kind of the audience that we want to reach. So 14 years with the RCMP, with NWEST, and you are, I keep telling people this about you, that you're a nationally recognized firearms expert. And in Canada specifically, that's a very rare thing.
It is different. I'm flattered to be here. Thank you.
Of course.
And again, I still ask, why am I here? Essentially, for starters, what throws everybody off is I'm not a gun nut. Mm-hmm. Do I own some firearms? Yes. But I'm not a gun nut. It's a commodity that I dedicated myself to preventing the illicit use of. So the use of trafficking, fabrication, all the nuances associated to illicit firearms, ammunition components. And so in the time that I was with NWEST, which started in 2006, came on as a constable, developed my skills, and because I had this a military background, so I had a good understanding of Controlled Goods Act, things of that nature, because weaponry that was being moved around the world, helping out in Kosovo with the cataloging of firearms for the United Nations post, when things had finally settled down in that country. Then when I'd come to went into the RCMP, I was sort of tapped on the shoulder and we went, we kind of want you with us and to NWEST. Would you consider applying for the position, doing the interviews? And I did, and I got accepted. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to come into this, I want to know everything I possibly can. Laws, regulations, the mechanics, the nuances, absolutely everything and anything that had to do with firearms. And yet still people couldn't understand, well, you're not a gun nut. And I went, no, I'm not. But it's a criminal, it's a commodity that's sought out by the criminals. And because it's sought out by the criminals to be able to carry out what they want to do, I need to be better than they are in understanding the law and then being able to help law enforcement agencies, domestic and international. So I really strive to learn the laws, the regulations, not only in Canada, but the United States. And then I started getting pulled into, I was tasked for any of the files with Interpol. So if I was dealing with another country, learning what the regulations were in that country, what the international norms were. And just started going and going and going. And then we ended up in the gang war in the Lower Mainland in the early 2000s. And I started seeing homicides with what we're dealing with a lot right now, privately made firearms. And so I thought, okay, how do we deal with this? And I actually had some individuals going, why are you bothering? You're never going to achieve what you want to achieve. And I went, no, knowing the law is knowing how it's written, why it's written, and being able to understand what's written. So I went to probably one of the legal minds in firearms best in Canada by a gentleman by the name of Vincent Perry in Ontario. And he said, Frank, I'll put the case laws together for you. And then I wrote a business plan, and we ran a project. And because of what we did in that project, changed regulations or the import laws, serialization, the registration, or in certain cases, the outright banning of certain types of privately made firearms, the kit guns.
Right.
And so now I've also taken that to use that into the international world. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with the firearms and the illicit use. And in my time with National Weapons Enforcement, with the RCMP, I was approached by Safer Schools Together. And they said, look, we have some situations where we have young persons posting videos or photographs, and then sometimes there's text with that. And Frank, could you do the backgrounds to say, is there a threat to the young person themselves, or to the schools or individuals around that young person? And so I started doing that for Safer Schools Together. And doing that, also we worked a few projects together where, we recognized threats of the highest level for school shootings, potential school shootings. And we circumvented them before they happened.
Yes.
And from that time forward, every time, not only just in British Columbia, but I know I've done some for Washington State as well, where I'll get the phone call, I'll get the email, Frank, can you review these videos or photographs and the associated text? And can you tell us what's going on? And the first thing I'll do is I'll review it. I generally come back and ask for a few more questions.
Of course.
Because I want the context. And then what I always do is I start from the outside and I look in. And I'm looking at first the person, what they're doing, how they're portraying themselves. Are they flashing cash? Is there drugs in the background? Things of that nature. And then I start looking at how they're holding the firearms, or whatever the case may be. And then I start focusing on the firearms, the items. And I look for certain markers. But I have to state right off, the first thing I do on every time I do an opinion, with regard to that opinion, I simply state every depiction that is noted is an actual firearm until it's proven otherwise. And my rationale for that is because in my years with National Weapons Enforcement and post that, the number of converted firearms, pellet guns and airsofts that have been converted to fire actual ammunition. So that's why that's really important to be there.
That makes sense.
And I will look for unique markers or physical characteristics of the person and the firearm to say, is this real or is it not real? So, or the chances are it is actual firearm capable of causing grievous or bodily harm, or it's not. And I mean, some are really simple to point out. I look at the magazines. I know it's a pellet gun or an airsoft magazine. They're pointing the firearm straight at the camera. And I can see the obstruction in the barrel. And this is something I'll demonstrate in tomorrow's presentation. And we look at these things. And then the recent one we had was the young man who was in 2 school districts. And he had what we call a craft gun. And
That one was quite interesting. I remember
that
seeing that live and talking with you about that.
looked at that, and you know how I twitched to that.
Yeah.
Because dealing with in the Caribbean and other places where we talk about slam firearms, where basically it's two tubes slammed together with a metal divot to discharge the round. But here I have a young man who had one photograph is by airsofts, and then the next one he has in his hand what appears to be a craft firearm.
And can you just talk a little bit about, like, for somebody who's never heard that term, craft firearm, what does that mean?
Okay, so there's worldwide, there's the kind of different agencies have different definitions with regard to what they call privately made firearms. So if I'm using the term privately made firearms, the full term for me is modern techniques for privately made firearms. So CNC fabrication, items that look like guns.
Yeah.
When it comes to craft firearms, we are looking at even at its most rudimentary, is we're taking two pieces of pipe that can slide into one another. One has got a flat back plate, has got a piece of metal that can strike the primer, and you take those two pipes, you slam it together, discharges the round.
Yeah.
That's a craft. That is the down and dirty. We've seen those all over Latin America. We see them in the Philippines. We see them in the Caribbean. We've seen them here in Canada. I've seen craft firearms made from bicycle pumps.
Wow.
So imagination is the only limitation. But with the new world of privately made firearms, 3D printers,
Yeah.
they're in schools, they're in libraries, they're in technical facilities, they are in by the hour rental hobby establishments.
Yeah.
And we've had kids make these privately made firearms 3D printed. Now I have to get it across. You know, people think, well, 3D printed, the whole gun is 3D printed.
Right.
And it's not.
Yeah.
We're looking at a portion of the firearm that's 3D printed. The uppers might be 3D printed. Most of them are not. They're aftermarket components made out of metal. The barrels are metal because they're the pressure-bearing components to be able to handle that pressure.
Yeah.
But we've had high school kids make them. We've had in the States, thankfully not in Canada, but actually use them in the States in shootings.
Right.
And so I've really focused on getting that message across to be aware, parents to be aware of what kids are using those items for. I had a student at a trade school here in British Columbia making AR rifle lower receivers.
Right.
Excuse me, at the school in the facility
Yeah.
CNC machine. And the professors had no idea.
Because it doesn't look like a firearm.
And so I laid it on the table and they went,
Yeah.
great work. I said, do you know what it is? And they went, no. And they went, that's not possible.
Yeah.
I said, it's possible. And I'll tell you exactly what machine he built it on, because he told us, and where to find the program.
Yeah.
So now, and I was recently in Madrid with Impact Europol for a conference as a subject matter expert with 3D printing. And I really want, 3D printing is a good thing for medical, for technical.
Yeah.
It is an amazing innovation that's just developing and developing and developing and getting better and getting better, and the materials are getting better. But like anything else, whether it's our cell phones, our computers, there's always a dark side.
Of course.
And for me, I really want to get it across to parents and educators to be aware of what's going on within your circle. And if there's something, you know, if we have a student who's not fitting in or not comfortable, but is technically minded, and you don't have to be really skilled.
Yeah, right.
Not anymore, because all I have to do is go onto YouTube, find a guide
Yeah.
on how to make these items.
Or find the right subreddit as well.
Oh, the subreddit,
Yeah.
FOSCAD,
Yeah.
or all these other places. It's all there. All the plans are there, and to upload the items into a computer, take the CAD program, create the STL, create the G code, put it into the computer, or put it into the printer. Everything's set up, and away you go.
And the big thing to touch on for that is that that's publicly available. Like,
Yes.
you don't pay
No.
for any of that. The only thing you need to pay for is really access to the part that manufactures it, right? So the 3D printer, the CNC machine, which, as you mentioned, is widely available.
Oh, yeah. Very much so.
And one of the things you talked about earlier that I think I really want to make an important note here, because usually when you think the general public, when we think firearms or firearms problems, usually the mind gravitates towards the United States. And this isn't going to be a conversation about gun problems or things like that, but there's a general consensus is that, what I can imagine in Canada is people don't usually associate guns in Canada, usually with, long rifles and things like that. But, from my first experience, even meeting you and the NWest team was at our Gangs and Guns conference, my first conference, when, what you folks did was you had this whole long table of guns, firearms that have been confiscated here in BC. And I was blown away by the types of firearms, the types of handguns, the types of, semi-automatic rifles, automatic rifles, pipe guns, zip guns, the silver baller that you see like in the Hitman video games, that was there. And I was like, these are all from here?
Yeah.
My world had completely just like what I knew about firearms, what I thought I knew about firearms in Canada had completely shifted. And I can imagine now with 3D printing and how far it's gotten, we're at completely different levels.
And we are. Where pre-COVID, we had firearms that were sourced from within Canada. So we had straw purchasers, and straw purchasers is where you have a legal person who has a license goes and buys firearms for a criminal. We had firearms being smuggled out of the United States, but the laws changed in Western United States, Washington State, Oregon, California, and Nevada, the closing what they called the gun show loophole. So a person had to go through a license or business to have the background checks before they could buy the gun. But then COVID hit. So nobody could go to the States to get guns, and that was all closed down. And in Eastern Canada, we saw polymer 80 kits. So these are these kits that are partially finished of Glock handguns, and then you would finish the kit with everything supplied, and then you would buy the aftermarket parts, which are not regulated by Canadian law.
Right.
And you would make the gun. And a perfectly functional firearm, for me, it would take about an hour to make a handgun.
Wow.
And then if you thought, if I print what we call a Glock auto switch, which will convert a semi-automatic handgun, the Glock automatic, for me to print 35 minutes.
And how small is that switch, by the way?
The size of a quarter.
Yeah.
And then I put that on the Glock, no mechanical training needed. I have an automatic weapon that is capable of discharging close to 1,200 rounds per minute. So the damage that can be done by that, because today we were listening to various presenters talking about the errant rounds, people firing off. Case in point, the football game celebration yesterday.
Yeah, the tragedy that happened at Kansas City.
At Kansas City, you have individuals, I don't know if they had Glock switches, but even without Glock switches, here's this indiscriminate firing that is going on. And look at the number of children that were hurt.
Yeah. Terrible.
A reporter who died. You take and put on an auto switch. Right now in the United States, it's gone absolutely mad. We have them here in Canada. We have them in the Caribbean. We have them in Latin America. You take a semi-automatic firearm and you've turned it into an automatic weapon.
Yeah. With a very easily printable and makeable
Device.
Yeah.
Nothing to it. So that's where certain sides, I've got to stop using, I promised myself I'd stop using the word aspects because I was
Yeah.
using that too much. So that created this, it's opened up a whole new world. So once COVID hit, we saw the 3D printing, printers were coming in, and people were starting to fabricate. Because in Canada, other than what was supposed to be the serialized portion of the firearm, everything else is non-regulated. So you could just buy it. We had guys buying 5, 10, 15 of all the other components.
Right.
They were just printing the lowers.
And buying them in Canada.
Yes.
Like Canadians buying these parts,
Yes.
manufacturing them, creating them, basically these unregistered firearms. Yeah.
And COVID created that change. And law enforcement within the NWest, I had recognized early and had spoken to the lab facilities with the Canadian Firearms Program, said, look, we need to train the guys and girls up with NWest because these are the guys and girls that are going to do the seizures, going into the search scenes, writing the warrants, supporting the law enforcement in doing this. And very straightforward, we became better than the Americans because they were behind what we were doing. And everybody else is catching up. I've been pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to get this message across into Europe. That's why I was brought to Madrid. I was told, Frank, you're very direct in what you're putting out there, and they need to hear it.
Right.
And again, it's to get that message across. This is what's happening, and parents, schools, libraries, educational, you have to be aware. Pay attention to what's going around you. It's not to say that the child doesn't have, they have great computer knowledge. Take that. Have them create other things.
Yeah.
Give them, because I was talking to one teacher today, and she said, yeah, I listened to a couple of kids at school just talking about 3D printing guns.
Right.
So, well, take the 3D printing, but start creating other stuff.
Yeah.
Give them projects. Because when I went to school, we did metal, we did welding shop,
Yep.
auto, woodworking. Well, guess what? Now you get a CNC machine. Do something with that. Create items that'll be good for the community, for the school.
Yeah.
The 3D printing. Make things for the schools. You know, or just you let them use their imagination in other things where those thought of making a firearm doesn't enter the picture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that aspect is such an there's the word aspect again. It's a really important topic when we talk about these things because, again, I just say how valuable your expertise and knowledge is to us to the social media piece because at the beginning it was saying, here's an image, here's a video. Basically what that conversation was is, can you help us identify, is this gun real or not? Because in our world of behavioral threat assessment, we're always trying to identify if somebody has made a threat to shoot or made a threat to kill. We are trying to identify, does that person, the subject of concern, do they have the access to the means to carry out the threat? And with the proponent of social media and how easy it is to share something, if lo and behold, their social media, their Instagram, their TikTok, wherever, showcases that, oh, look, they do have access to the means. Well, our immediate risk reducing intervention is, hey, let's remove access. And that comes with law enforcement help and intervention in saying, hey, because of what's on social media, there is a chance, there is a high probability that this person owns this firearm. We need, as law enforcement, to be able to take this away. That's where the search warrant comes in. And your expertise in helping us out is where somebody has made a threat with a firearm, yes. In these exigent emergency situations, just like with any law enforcement, we're not going to have time to decide, is that gun that they're holding real or not? You know, we have to act on that. Exactly. And as us in the prevention world, we want to do our best to ensure that, hey, this weapon that they are posing with, can we determine with some level of certainty that it is a real firearm or a fake firearm? Because we, again, posing with firearms is unfortunately a norm that we see, not just in Canada, but throughout North America. But posing with firearms that are real or fake is something where we need, to identify, hey, is this potentially, does this have the potential to escalate further? And I've learned so much from talking with you, where, you've come to our office and shared, again, the knowledge. Let us hold the weapons. We've held firearms and weapons that are the exact same weight, but one of them's airsoft and one of them is real. So it's like, even in that, when I'm holding two of them in my hand, I can't tell.
And that's exactly it, because we've had even law enforcement. I had a file when I was still with NWest, and they came back, said, Frank, it's a real firearm that was seized in Richmond in a park. There was a meeting of some individuals. And I said, okay, who confirmed it was a firearm? The guy, they said, one of our new members, ex-military. Well, I'm ex-military,
Yeah.
but I know how realistic these items are. And I said, are you still there at the park? And they went, yes. You got the gloves on to protect any evidence. I said, drop the magazine.
Right.
So he drops the magazine, and all I hear is, ooh. And I went, okay, pull the slide back.
Yeah.
It was an AR type rifle.
Yeah,
and
right.
he goes, it's not a real gun.
Huh.
And I went, surprise, surprise. But you don't know. And that's why I say that caveat. It's always a real gun until proven
Yeah.
it's not. And again, as I stated earlier, we're having airsoft guns that are being converted full automatic without any real machining at all, just switching out the parts. So, and that's the same with certain handguns,
Right.
The airsoft handguns. Exact same. Maybe some of them do need a little bit of work, but it's all online.
Right.
And getting that information across to the analysts and then giving the suggestions. Yes, you have to get in touch with the police of the jurisdiction. They have to do the Canadian Firearms Registry online check. Find out if anybody in the house is licensed and owns firearms. If they're non-restricted firearms, you need to talk to the parents. If they are restricted firearms, the police officer can see what is registered to the house. Is what I'm looking at matches what is registered to the house? So we look at all those nuances. And we talk about, okay, if their searches have to be done, we look at the language, some of the text that we've seen, what they're trying to portray, this, whether it's a gangster life or they've been bullied in school. Excuse me, because we've had a number where the kids have been bullied in school,
Right.
and they've made the threats back, or somebody's threatened a sister or a brother, and they said, yeah, well, guess what? I'm coming to take care of it. We need to address that, because if we don't, I had a boss who had a great saying. When did you know? What did you know? And what did you do about it?
Yeah.
And if you don't,
Right.
if you hit any of those three and you don't follow through and somebody gets hurt, who's really accountable
Yeah.
besides the person who pulled the trigger? Is you were aware and you didn't follow through. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah.
Again, real simple. What did you know? When did you know? And what did you do about it? That's the golden rule. And that goes for anything. Whether, it's a threat with a gun, a knife, or whatever the case may be. Or even just straight out physical violence. And then, we look at, like you said, do they have the means? Do they have a plan? Do they have an exit strategy? Do they have a target list? One of the files we worked had all of that.
Yep.
These are the things we have to pay attention to. But sometimes it comes down to, we have to look. And it's knowing where to look.
And that's the thing. And that's the whole idea of what we want to do here is we want to share with people and folks, like, these are the things that, hey, we have experts that are looking at these things. And the better we can give that information, the healthier, our communities are going to be, the more safer our communities are going to be. So I'm interested because you said you were in Madrid and you have been just the world traveler in the past couple of years. So I can't even tell, like, when you say you're away, like, I can't even tell if it's on vacation or you're just doing this for work, which is a good thing because, but, how did that work kind of evolve into the United Nations and Madrid and all throughout, overseas?
So, like I said, it was drawn originally. I was supposed to go to Ukraine, and then COVID hit. And because I also speak French, the person who wanted to bring me into Ukraine suggested to a person that it was a UN LIRIC and said they need somebody who speaks French and knows gun law.
Wow. It's a very specific.
Yeah, it is unique. And then each country is different, right?
Yeah.
And so they said, I was tapped on the shoulder. And I was interviewed for an hour and a half in French. And Frank, can you do this? And I went, yes, I'll assist your legal team. And so for a number of months, going through the proposals for changing their criminal code with regard to firearms and articulation, adding to, modifying, amending, and giving them that. And UN LIRIC recognized that I had these other skill sets, said, well, we'd like you to come on as a technical advisor on a long-term contract with us to assist us with reviewing presentations, documentation, participating in teaching with regard to firearms trafficking, firearms management, all the nuances with relation to illicit firearms, explosives, and ammunition. And then they found out I had this background on self-fabrication, and nobody in the world had really touched it yet. So put together a presentation, helped put together a presentation for the law enforcement side of the house for what they call the Caribbean Roadmap, where Caribbean countries would identify how they want to tackle gun crime. And so helped out with that recently in Guyana with a trafficking course. During the period of COVID, it was all online.
Yeah.
But once then we could travel. It was in Jamaica, helping create a firearms trafficking team in the Caribbean. Going to St. Lucia, teaching a firearms shooting incident reconstruction course, because I have that skill set.
Yeah.
I'll be doing that probably at the end of June, starting in Belize for all the Caribbean. So I get pulled into all these unique nuances. I was brought in as a technical advisor for the next 4 or 5 years with the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners. I have labs reaching out to me from Ecuador, Mexico, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, France, going, Frank, this is what we got. Can you help us with it? What do we need to do? How do we need to look at it? And these are the forensic labs.
Right.
But they're dealing with things they haven't seen before, or something new has come. Frank, have you seen this before? And I'll go, yes or no. If I don't, I'll find them somebody that does know and can help them, because I'm not going to BS them.
Yeah.
But if I do, here, and I'll provide them with the information, whether it's photographs, videos, literature, the documentation associated to it, and go, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to look at it.
Right.
It is an amazing world, changing very, very quickly. Yeah. Europe is really coming into what's happening with the self-fabrication world. They're starting to make seizures, unfortunately, for the illicit market. And so they're reaching out, Frank, we need your help.
Right.
And I just go provide some guidance. And to the best I can. And like I said, if I don't know, I'll find you somebody that does.
I'm just curious, out of all the different countries and laws that you've viewed, which one to you do you think has, or what laws do you think make the most forward-thinking gun laws? Like when you're looking at different types of laws and you're like, what are some of the things that jump out as to this needs to be changed, or how do you future-proof these laws?
That's a good question. And it could open up a political quagmire. I am not going to put my personal opinion on some of the things that are going on in Canada.
Yep.
But the majority of Canadians, let's say if we look at Canada.
Yeah.
Majority of Canadians who are gun owners are responsible, legal, moral, and ethical. And they followed the rules to a T. We have individuals that aren't, who are licensed and are not. We have to deal with them as harshly as possible. We have individuals no different than if they have a driver's license and they make a mistake.
Right.
They have an accident. Well, they're held accountable for the accident. If you do something with a fault that is criminally negligent, you're going to be held accountable. There's people who make mistakes, and then you have criminal negligent or you have criminal.
Right.
And those have to be dealt with accordingly. I've taken firearms away from people, and subsequently they got the firearms back because they remedied, because they made a mistake. We have persons who have treated mental health issues, and they're fine. Mental health is not a crime. We all have our good days and our bad days. But because I've been exposed to two unique worlds on the military side, we had the individual in Eastern Canada, ex-military, didn't get the care he was supposed to get. He shouldn't have had that firearm. So, it's dependent. There's background checks that should be. Do I believe that organized crime group members should have a PAL? No. But yet a lot of Canadians in Canada don't know that you can be a member of organized crime with a patch on your back, and you can own a firearms license.
Interesting.
If you haven't been found committing a violent crime within a number of years. But you're still part of an organized crime group. You got to ask yourself the question.
That's interesting, yeah.
So there's these nuances that, having played in the world for so long, is being aware of it.
Yeah.
And I'll call it out. I have no problem calling it out. For some of the, with regard to your initial question, I had the opportunity when I was in Guyana to see some modifications that were made to their firearms law. And they made perfect sense. They were really, really well written, forward thinking, with regard to illicit self-fabrication, importation of components, regulation of components, things of this. And I've been pushing for years, when I was still with NWest, for the pressure-bearing components. Some people may not like this, but the pressure-bearing components of a firearm to be serialized and registered, or you have to have a license to buy it. If I have a person who has no license that can go in and buy firearms components to finish a 3D fabricated gun, there's a problem.
That makes sense, because what other purpose would you have for purchasing those firearm components other than making and building a firearm?
That's exactly it. Now you can't get the handgun components because the laws as it sits right now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop somebody from going to the States and buying all those components and sneaking them across the line.
Yeah.
Because they're not regulated. Because they're not serialized, they're not the gun, they are not controlled. Therefore, fill your boots.
Yeah.
So there's all these unique nuances that need to be addressed. If they'll be addressed, I don't know. I own firearms.
Right.
I'm responsible. They're locked up. They're secured. I'm very particular, very anal.
Right.
But most Canadians are. But sometimes parents have to be made aware of what is happening. Like I said, I had a teacher and the kids were talking about it at school. Well, the kids are talking about it. That's something to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just as we kind of start to wrap up here, I think, we've seen technological advancements even since COVID, right? In where we are now. I'm just curious, with your background, with your expertise, what sort of future innovations do you anticipate will further in this work on the prevention side, but also kind of on the flip side as well?
Whew. So the mandatory marking of pressure-bearing components and the regulation thereof, even if it's not registered, at least the person has to have a license to buy those items.
Right.
What we do see coming and how far away it is, because right now it's cost prohibitive, is 3D metal sintering. So instead of a polymer, it is of metal. And when that becomes desktop affordable,
Right.
we are going to enter into a whole new world.
And sorry, synthring.
So think of 3D printing,
Yep.
but you're using metal powder.
Oh,
And sintering is you're adding the heating process
yeah.
and you sinter it in the layers.
I've never heard of that.
Machines are extraordinarily expensive right
Yeah.
now, but so was CNC when
Right.
it first started. Okay, 3D printing came down the quickest,
Yep.
but CNC, we have the Ghost Gunner 1, 2, the Ghost Gunner 3. We now have the CNC Coast Runner, which I got to see at SHOT Show in Nevada a couple of weeks ago, which does the same thing. And that machine can cut even harder metals than the Ghost Gunner. So it can, and it's open source. So if there's items, as long as they fit within that building platform, I can build the components.
Right.
But when we get to that point where metal sintering on a desktop unit is affordable, we're going into a whole new world. And nobody's really talking about it yet. I'm trying to get the message out.
Yeah.
But it's coming, because once innovation moves forward, it moves forward quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm of no doubt. I mean, industry is working towards that. So how far away is it? It's not far. But boy, when it gets here, within the illicit world, it's going to be well used.
Well, I think before we kind of wrap up here, I because we're all about, again, being informed, and primarily, a lot of us listening might be parents or might, know parents, right? You've talked a lot about the things to know and to be aware of, but any kind of closing thoughts for folks who might be watching or listening, especially in that prevention aspect?
Know your kids. Engage your kids. When I was growing up, we had rifles in the house on a gun rack. And if we wanted to look at them, they were chained up. We'd ask Dad, and he'd take them down. We took the mystery away from it. Most kids now that are exposed to firearms are in video games.
Yep.
And they have no concept of what that item can really, really do. Teach your kids the respect. Teach your kids, it's like having the liquor cabinet.
Right.
And I can still remember my dad going, if you want a drink, we're going to have a drink together. It wasn't a mystery. It wasn't hidden away. I never went into the cabinet, but it was the same with the gun. We were taught respect. And it comes down to anything. The car keys, the medicine in the medicine cabinet. Talking to your kids, knowing where their mind is at, knowing how they feel, how are they doing at school. Take the time to listen to your kids. If they're having a bad day, find out why. I'm a father. That's what I did. And she had bad days, she had good days. But she learned that if she had a bad day, she could come and talk to us because we didn't make a mystery out of it. We didn't make fun of it. We didn't belittle it. And it had to do whether she was having a bad day or if she was having, going into her period and all these sort of things.
Yeah.
It was not a mystery.
Right.
We were there for her. And I've known single parent family homes that were at times more solid than two parent homes.
Yeah.
Because the parent that was there
Yeah.
was engaged and listened. And that's the most important thing. And teach them. Teach them, ask them, what interests you? Take the mystery away from certain things and teach what damage they can do and teach the responsibility. No different than we give them the car keys and start to teach them to drive.
Yeah. It's the same analogy we have with phones and social media. It's just like with anything. The more informed we can be, the better off. So, Frank, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
I'm still stunned you even want to talk to me.
It's been a blast, man. You just got such a unique way of looking at things in a very direct but open and honest perspective. And I think that's something that it makes sense why people are reaching out from overseas to get this. You know, I think you said it earlier, right? You're not an academic, but the way that you explain it is you don't want a politician saying these things. You don't want somebody who is educated or, you know, no offense to anybody, again, who has that, but you know, it's somebody who has the reps in to share.
And that's exactly it. Learn the skill set, understand what you're dealing with. Don't just talk about it, actually know about it and learn about it. And if you've done the job, the greatest supervisor, the greatest educator, the greatest expert does not keep it to themselves. You take what you learn and you pass it on so that the person you pass it on to becomes better at it than you are. And that's in everything.
Yeah. Love it. I think that's a perfect way to cap it off. So, Frank, once again, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right.